Welcome, everybody. I am excited today to be joined by Michaele Morrrow, an expert in the higher education space as well as the digital education space. So really appreciate you taking the time to be here, Michaele. Thank you for the opportunity to talk.
Thanks, Eric.
So maybe just briefly tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Sure, yeah. So I'm originally from Texas. You might hear a little twang in my voice, but I've been in the Boston area for about 12 years now. And I came here because of a professor position at Northeastern University. Before I got into that world, went to school and thought I was going to be a lawyer, and instead ended up majoring in accounting so I could have a specialization. I had no idea that there was such a thing, but I thought I would be a corporate tax attorney, and ended up getting an accounting degree, doing an undergrad, a graduate degree, taking the CPA exam, and then working in public accounting. I was in a pretty small market for accounting, and it was going to be difficult for me to move up in my firm. And so I ended up at a bit of a crossroads after about 5 years and decided to go back to get my PhD in accounting. I wanted to teach. That was really appealing to me. And then the research side of it was appealing to me too. So I specialized in tax, which sounds boring, but tax policy. It turns out everyone has an opinion on tax policy. They think they don't, but they do. And so it's been a really, it's been a way for me to actually work in the law, but also work in a dynamic and changing field. And so, like I said, I came to Boston area originally. I was a professor of accounting at Northeastern University for about 5 years. Then I was at, I guess, 6 years. Then I was at Suffolk University for about 5 years, where I taught accounting and tax. I ran a low-income tax prep center. And then for my last few years there, I was also the director of the Center for Executive Education at Suffolk, and the director of the Executive MBA program, which you graduated from, not while I was there, and had a chance to revamp the curriculum and work on kind of updating what we were teaching our Executive MBA students. And then about a little over a year ago, I had the opportunity to come to Merrimack for an interesting position. The job description was to prepare students for the jobs that are out there today. And that's what you would think college is for. But I think the focus was more to think about what are the skills that students actually need for the jobs, and how do we close the gap between what they're getting in the classroom versus the pace of change in the marketplace and with technology, and how do we do that. So in my current role, I now run our entire career advising center, and really what we're working on, and I'll speak more about this in a few minutes, is how we use technology to re-envision the career journey that students take from the minute they arrive on campus until they leave and beyond, and how that helps them be ready for this ever-changing world.
Yeah, I mean, that's an amazing background, and I know we've had the opportunity to, know each other for a while now, and the transformations that were happening in education. When you hear things like the enrollment cliff, or on the association side, you hear, the loss of value to members or subscription-based models and things like that. There's so much that has happened. And then you strap COVID-19 in the mix, and it, everything just exponentially moves and changes and transforms into different models. What are the trends happening now in higher education, right? Because there's a lot of university presidents that are sitting out there wondering, what do I do? Education is changing. It's changing in some fundamental way of delivery, or even the way we conceptualize the delivery of those things. So what are these major trends that are happening in the education space?
Yeah, so your first question was, if I'm a university president, what do I do? And I'll have to, I think you know me pretty well, and I'm a Peloton devotee, and one of my favorite instructors on that platform, one of the quotes I love from him is, if you're tired of pushing, try pulling. And so I would say to university presidents, quit pushing away the trends that are happening and start pulling them towards you. It's going to happen whether you like it or not. So, you know, one of the discussions I have with my team all the time is we have to meet our client, which is the student, to be clear, where they are. What's kind of gotten lost in all this is the students that are coming into our world today, they're digital natives. And so the idea of online education, that's not scary to them. While it may be what they don't, you know, they don't prefer that. They want to have that social experience, but they're used to being online. This is really just part of what they've done their entire lives. And so I think what we see at the top of the structure in a lot of higher ed institutions, most higher ed institutions, are people that aren't digital natives, and they really want to take an old model and shove it, push it into this new model, and that's not going to work. So if we think about how people learn, for instance, if you and I are face to face and we can have an engaging conversation, and you know you've been in the classroom, you know that if you're speaking for more than about 20 minutes, everyone's asleep. So how do you keep them awake? You ask them questions, you engage them, you have a back and forth. And so it comes naturally to you when you're face to face with students. The problem with online learning or any venues like that is you tend to have people say, well, I would just get up and lecture in front of a class. I'm going to transfer that model to online and that's going to work. And it really doesn't, because there's all these other things that happen. You're not engaged because you're not live. You have fatigue from staring at a screen. So what should you do? Well, you should be chunking this into small portions. We know that when we watch videos online, I don't know about you, but if a video is longer than 3 minutes, I don't care, even if it's funny, right? I'm done. And so the idea of thinking about how can you chunk your content and make it more palatable for the person that's consuming that content. What happens in the marketing world should be happening in the education space. But that's really tough for people that have done something one way for their entire lives to try to think about how that should change. And so if you put all these things together and think about the COVID world and the fact that many professors still think that if they don't say it, the students don't learn it, that really puts us in this position where there's a huge disconnect between the audience, the young audience that's comfortable with online and would love to learn at their own pace, look up something in the middle of the night if they want, have different sources. I used to get mad at my students when I was teaching if they had a device and they were, you know, on their device. Right. And I found out I found out at one point, someone said to me, well, no, Professor Morrrow, I'm actually looking up answers to questions that you're asking, or I'm looking up this reference, or I'm looking up this person. I'm listening to you, but I'm trying to, you know, deepen my experience. The student didn't say it in that way, right? But I'm trying to understand what you're saying by using the tools available to me. And so the huge opportunity in online is that someone can hit pause and they can go do all that research and they can come back. And so they're actually going to learn more and have a richer learning experience because of the platform. But it's really hard for people to embrace that because they want to be the arbiter of knowledge, the purveyor of knowledge. It's difficult to shake that.
Yeah, no, that's definitely something where, you know, you have to get over that the faculty might not necessarily be the knowledge experts in the room. I mean, I remember the first MBA class I taught, I had the CFO of a university in my class when I was teaching strategic management. So, I mean, I'm going to defer to them to talk through a lot of the financial aspects of the course. But you know what? They got really engaged and the students learned from each other, and it kind of created more of this collaborative sharing environment so that everyone had a stake in the learning. But I mean, I got to imagine when you're not face to face, that does become something that needs to be balanced, that interaction and engagement piece.
It has to be very intentional. So I think there's a planning that comes with it. And one of the advantages I feel like I have from just the path that I chose, if you choose a path of taxation and tax policy, you're super comfortable with change and having to update your class every year. And so you have to keep, pretty much both feet in the real world. And so I think my colleagues in other disciplines that don't change, it's often easier to continue on with what you've always taught because you don't have to update those materials. And so I think for me, one of my strategic advantages and being comfortable with change has been that I haven't had a choice. And so you really have to be intentional with that material. And as things change, thinking about, okay, now I'm in a Zoom environment. How do I get people to engage? Well, I have to design an activity where I send people to breakout rooms. I may have to, in advance, think about who are the students in my class, where are they in their learning journey, and who should I match them with? That takes a little bit of time, and it's also a little scary because, you know, it's a new, now you have to manage the technology, whereas many of us are comfortable with classroom management. That online environment is just very tempting to stand up and talk, and you know, you don't have the feedback, so you don't know if people are sleeping or bored or whatever.
Right.
But it can be done, and it can be a very engaging and fulfilling experience. Folks who've been teaching in online programs have known this. I launched an online MST when I was at Northeastern University, and the tools were, this was 2009, the tools were not as advanced. But what we found is as the tools advanced and we could see people's faces on camera, we could make use of chat functions, we had check-ins and engagement points. That was really what people wanted, is to feel like, okay, I'm still home and I can be somewhat passive, but then I'm also being engaged in the class and my voice can be heard even though I'm online.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot to think about. So if I'm the president and I know these changes are coming, and now I'm kind of pulling them towards me because I've accepted that reality, you know, and maybe have gone through the 5 stages of grief as it relates to COVID, right? You know, and you're looking at now the acceptance and dealing with these new realities that you're set forth, which, you know, if you have no online capability, may be a significant investment and a total change in mentality or philosophy with the way the school teaches. You know, where do they start? I mean, is it drive it with the, you know, they get the provost involved, they get everybody involved and say that we're committing to this and we're moving forward? Like, it's such a huge undertaking.
Yeah, I think the tone has to come from the top, and there have to be resources provided. I know when Merrimack shifted to all online in the spring, they came up with a concept of technology buddies. So they looked at the innovators in each department and in each school, and that person, unfortunately for that person, was the buddy, right, that faculty colleagues could reach out to. Now, it's not that we don't have an IT help desk and all those types of things, but it was really who is the model for, and we have some online graduate programs, and so that was already in existence. And so it was mainly the folks that were already teaching in those programs, what were the lessons that they've learned and how can they get people up to speed more quickly. I think the tough part about this is, again, none of this could be done in person. And so if someone doesn't have the right technology, if they don't have the right laptop, if they don't have the right background, right? So, you know, where do you want someone to actually do these, to have these classes or maybe to record these videos? What if they don't have good internet? Do you send them a hotspot? And so that goes for students too, but I think you have to start with really taking an assessment of the resources that you already have on campus. How can you strategically use those resources? Because you're not going to get everyone 0 to 60.
Right.
It's just not going to happen. You know, many faculty members were already using Blackboard or some sort of learning management system, but many weren't. I mean, those tools have been around since the early 2000s, and some faculty just haven't wanted to adopt that. And so even just getting everyone there where students can find the resources they need for class, that was an undertaking. And so now I think it moves into stage 2, which is how do we make these classes engaging? That's a little tougher prospect because some people are good at this and some people aren't, just like being in the classroom. And so it's a tough job. I'm glad that I'm not a university president, but I think looking at those resources and what are the resources that are going to serve you the best, at least in the short term, and then long term, you have an eye toward who are faculty that can do all these things that have traditionally been required, right? Do the teaching, do the research, do the service, but also are comfortable and are adaptable to change. And that's tough.
Yeah, I mean that's a lot when you think about transformation, and you know, along those lines, you had mentioned something earlier about skill-based learning. How is that a shift in mentality in the higher ed space? And first of all, what is it, and how is that a shift?
Yeah, so I don't think the shift has completely happened yet. I think what I'm doing in my work is to try to get both students and faculty and even parents to think about not what's your major, but what are the skills that you're learning. And I think COVID-19 has shown us nothing like a pandemic to expose the cracks in, or maybe the chasms, you know, that can open up in a society when you wipe out entire industries, when you wipe out sports, for example. So I'll use that as a little bit of a frame here. So we have a sports management concentration at Merrimack. And if you think about, I'm a graduating senior in May of 2020, where am I going to work? There are no sports. Many of our majors would go and work maybe for a high school, go and work for a D1, D2, D3 program at a college. They might be working in a sport adjacent industry. So maybe I'm going to go work at DraftKings, or maybe I'm going to go work, you know, I don't know, for Bruins or Celtics or someone like that, right? Those jobs didn't exist. So what do you do? Well, now you have to back it up and say, well, sport management is my major, but what skills do I actually have? And
Okay.
So an exercise I went through with students were, maybe you did a marketing minor. I hope you did a marketing minor, because guess what? If you have any sort of social media skills, those jobs are still there. And in fact, they're more important than ever because they're all online, and that's the way we can reach customers. And so, you know, if not, how can we develop those skills? And we can talk about LinkedIn Learning if you want, but, you know, really thinking about what are the skills that I have and how do those skills apply to multiple industries. So we did some sessions with students. We called it Career Pivot. I talk a lot about how, you know, if you're going to live to be 100, which these folks are, right? If you're going to live to be 100, your career is going to be anywhere from 60 to 70 years. The average length of a job is about 5 years now. And the average life of a skill is about 5 years. And so if you learn something, you're going to have to refresh that skill every 5 years. You're going to have to be redeveloping skills a lot. And so you need to become a lifelong learner, and you need to get used to the fact that this isn't it. When you graduate in 4 years or 5 years, if you do a graduate degree, you're not done. You have to continue to build that skill set. You know, you have to put those tools in your toolbox, right? Because you never know what might need to be fixed. And you never know when your industry might just go away. Who would have predicted that there would be no sports? Like no one would have ever said that this industry overnight would just dry up.
Yeah.
That's not right. And so I think we have to be careful in all industries not to get comfortable in saying, well, I work in accounting, I have a safe job because of X, Y, and Z. And so really this idea of what are the skills I'm developing? How do I continue to develop those skills? What's my plan for being a lifelong learner? And maybe I get tired of the industry that I'm working in, and I do want to make a pivot. It's not a forced pivot. It's a chosen pivot. What does that mean, and how does that look? And with a career that's going to stretch over that long period of time, you have to do that. You have to figure out that plan, because you can't just work for one employer or in one career for that long without having to be adaptable to change.
Yeah, that's amazing. I did not know that stat on the 5 years, you know, expiration on skills, and it makes sense because the technology around them changes, and things like that, or just new opportunities change. So we need to upskill as much as we, you know, within the same frequency that we buy cars, which is 5 years. It's
Yeah.
so much change.
Yeah. It's a little scary, right? And I know, like, I watch my students surpassing me. And so it's really hard when you're busy, and you're at the stage in our careers that you and I are, for instance. I do a lot of preaching. I don't do a lot of practicing. My LinkedIn learning every week says, "Oh, so sad, you did not hit your learning goal." You know, it shames me because I don't have time, or let me put it this way, I haven't made the time. I haven't, carved out that piece, in my day. And that's on me, because there's certainly many options to be able to do that. And now learning could take many forms, right? So I read a lot of books, I keep up on the news. So, that's part of it. And so I can count that and feel good. But really kind of learning those hard skills and being comfortable with technology, I think, is going to be important going forward. And so if you just get in the mindset that's what you're going to do, then it makes it a little easier long term for 70 years of your career.
Yeah, it's good to build those good habits.
Yeah.
But you also do consulting in the association space, which are 501c6 trade associations or professional associations that support industry. And they're going through a bit of their own education revolution, where they were structured in a way that positioned them to serve a specific geography. So if I was, a Massachusetts-based association serving the Massachusetts market, there might be a national one. But now kind of, everything forced into virtual, the virtual landscape's global. And, that means my competition's global. How are things changing, or what do you see in the education space in the association world?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll speak to a couple of things in the associations world. So as someone who is still a CPA, and, part of, you pass the CPA exam and you join the local association, right? Because that's where you're going to get your education. And in 2000-ish sometime, will not date myself too much, but in the early 2000s, when I had a 40-hour-a-year professional education requirement, we would go and sit in a room with the local chapter of the Texas Society of CPAs, and we would listen to a guy stand up and drone on for 8 hours. And that's how I refreshed my knowledge of state capitals, because we would play that game, right? And it was not how we should think about education, right? It was something that we did because we were required to do it, because a lot of what, the education we needed, we could often learn on the job, other than maybe yearly tax updates or something like that. I don't think that's the case anymore, because a lot of jobs are changing so quickly, and employers are forcing employees to figure things out on their own and then come back with solutions. Many accounting firms now are asking their employees to write algorithms to do tasks that used to be their job, right? So it's not, go in and add up this column of numbers. It's write an algorithm to do that for you. And then we're actually going to have a pay code for that algorithm to see, how much time it takes. And so I think that education piece becomes really important for associations. They have really I think they have a dual threat here. The first is that millennials and Gen Z, they're not joiners. They don't really want to join unless they can see clear benefits. And if you think about something like streaming TV, that's always my example here. I could be on Direct TV now, I could be on YouTube, I could be on Hulu, I could be on any of those, and then I can just unjoin the next day, right? And so when someone of those generations who associations should be targeting now, they're going to think really carefully, like, well, what is the benefit of being a part of this? What are they doing for me? Okay, I get a discount on my car insurance. all right, that might not be worth a big yearly fee. So I think one thing associations can do is focus on that education piece. So if you're thinking about, teaching people to be lifelong learners, where am I going to go for that lifelong learning? And that is a huge opportunity for associations to step in. Now, LinkedIn Learning is a huge competitor in this space. There's other, Coursera and edX. edX just announced a huge venture this week that they're going to partner with big companies to actually retrain a lot of low-income workers that lost their jobs and, need to be trained into different industries. I think that's one space in the market. It's really cool. I'm like, I want to work there. That sounds awesome. So I think that's one space in the market. But I think the space in the market that associations can occupy is similar to one that they've already occupied, which is we know your industry. We know the very specific niche things that your industry does, and we can provide you resources for that. So, if I'm thinking about accounting again, because that's my wheelhouse, LinkedIn Learning isn't going to provide very specific tax education. They're just not. It's not worth it to them, at least not yet. So associations can step into that space and say, we're going to do this education. We're going to do it right. We're in a very niche area. And so that is providing real value to someone who might decide to be a member. And I don't see any other way for associations to survive long term, not because they're doing anything wrong, but because, go back to meet your client where they are. The upcoming generations, they are not, I'm just going to join this because it's part of what I do in this profession. They might not even be in that profession long term. They might be in the profession for 10 years and then they're done. And so they don't really have that loyalty or that desire to spend their dollars in that way. So I think really associations have to think hard about what is your value proposition and put themselves in the shoes of that consumer that is of that generation.
Yeah, I mean, that's an area of significant opportunity. But I think also you got to look at the change higher ed's going through. There's a lot of kind of parallels between reinventing the business model and thinking around how you deliver education, your curriculum, what that looks like, and then incorporating your comments there on skill-based learning. That helps members of associations build skills, but also advance in their career, which is their end goal, not the association's end goal. And I think that's the customer-centric viewpoint, or member-centric viewpoint or student-centric viewpoint.
Yeah, I mean, and I think for a really long time in a lot of these spaces, not just higher ed, not just associations, it's been about what the people in charge think that people need, and they haven't ever really asked, what do you need? What do you want? And so it's been kind of accepted, like, this is how things work. I'm going to enroll in college and I'm going to go through X, Y, and Z. And that's not necessarily what people want anymore. I read an interesting article yesterday about, I think it's called Minerva College or University. And their model is they have what they call a toe instead of a footprint in multiple cities across the world. And it's like San Francisco, London, I think there's one maybe in Hong Kong, maybe one in India. And what students do is they live on campus. They have residential, housing for them. They live there for 6 months at a time and then they move. And so it's a pod concept or a cohort concept without the kind of flagship campus that has, the gym and the swimming pool and the everything else.
Just a pure learning center.
A pure learning center, but they learn online. Nothing is done in person. So it's like I live in an apartment complex and everyone in the apartment complex is going to the same school as me. That's really the concept. And I was just blown away by this. I'm like, of course, this makes so much sense because, the students are really paying for the housing, right? you're not providing them. I didn't get into like where their meal plans or anything. You're taking away some of the more expensive things, which are kind of in-person advising. Obviously the campus piece of it is expensive, but also the clubs. And so one of the comments that a student made was, yeah, I lived on the campus in India and I wanted to be part of a dance club, but instead I just went out and was like, dancing in the community, right? He found a group in the community and he actually got the cultural experience and was part of that instead of being limited to the campus experience. That's not for everyone. Some people are limited by their ability to travel or their desire to travel. Like there's a lot of things surrounding that. But it was just interesting to see that, this generation, they're like, okay, that sounds cool to
So
me.
their value they use housing in this example. They use housing as kind of the pivot point, meaning like we'll get you out of your parents' house,
Yeah.
right? We'll give you the housing, but it's going to be an all online program. But all
Yeah.
your neighbors are doing the same thing.
Yeah, and they have, they've established communities where they know who's taking what classes, and they can meet in person, or used to be in person, right? But they can meet and they can do study sessions and all the things that I think are important for, some of the socialization and also some of the learning and how that works. I just thought it was really interesting. Now, I know nothing about this college or university, so I'm not endorsing it, but I thought it was, I think this is what higher ed leaders have to do, is to use a term I hate, but to think outside of the box.
Yeah.
Because what people see online and what Gen Z and whoever comes after that, right? I don't know what little pithy thing they've made up about the next generation, but they see all kinds of things online. They're exposed to all kinds of concepts, and they are thinking differently, and they're willing to accept something if they think it works and they think that it adds value. And so I really think the problem is us. It's not them. And so, what higher ed should be doing and what these associations should be doing is hiring people that are innovators, that are strategic thinkers, that are saying, let's do something different. And then you don't automatically say, well, that's the way we've always done it. Like, that's disallowed on my team. If you say that's the way we've always done it, like, you cannot speak in a Zoom meeting. Like, that's it. I get that that's why we do it. In accounting, the concept was same as last year. Sally, and I always talked about how Sally was really nice and easy to get along with, but she could get you in a lot of trouble, right? Just because we did something last year doesn't mean we should do it this year. But that's hard to break because people don't like change. And especially in this uncertain climate, people really want to cling to what we did last year because it brings a sense of normalcy. But we'll die if we do that. I mean, not literally, but the industry will die because I think people are demanding more, and they should.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing to see how much transformation has happened in the education space, in associations, higher ed, K through 12. I mean, K through 12 is about to go through their first taste of virtual world and what they need to do to make that work. And, they're probably not even close to being ready from a system standpoint or capability standpoint. And there's probably a lot that can be done there. But, I know one thing that I've learned in talking to a lot of leaders is they've had some amazing learning lessons, this year. What's been your biggest 2020 learning lesson?
I think I've learned just generally that being adaptable, but also being empathetic are the two most important qualities that a leader can have. And I am generally a very private person. I don't let my work colleagues into my private life. That's just, that's part of my personality. But it's kind of hard not to do that when you're working from home and you have kids and you have stresses. And, I was famous for being the person that if a student started crying in my office, I would say, okay, here's a tissue, go to the bathroom, clean yourself up and come back. And I would listen, but I'm very uncomfortable with hearing maybe too much about people's personal lives. And maybe that was more, me being sensitive to that. But through this, I've had to hear a lot about people's personal lives because there's no way to separate it. And so I've had to get comfortable with having uncomfortable conversations that probably previously weren't appropriate for the workplace, but now when your workplace is your home. And I know some leaders have had problems being empathetic and have said, we still have to do X, Y, and Z no matter what. That's just not going to work. And so that empathy, being able to show a little bit of yourself so people can understand that you're empathetic, has been so important. And then being able to say, okay, well, you know, for instance, our model in advising is appointment based and seeing students and having that connection with students. We can't meet them in person anymore.
Right.
What does that mean? We have Zoom meetings. Actually turned out to be better for us because if a student can roll over in bed and click on a Zoom meeting on their phone, they're more likely to show up than if they have to walk across campus. Fun fact, meeting your client where they're at, right? And so in this case, being adaptable to change and saying, we're going to shift our whole model, not really necessarily because we want to, but because we have to. And then just saying, all right, we're going to roll with it. So the goals are going to change. You know, things are going to shift as we go through time, and that's okay. That's really hard for a lot of people. And so what I've seen is that some leaders are good fair weather leaders. And then when the clouds come over and we have a thunderstorm that lasts for 5 months, they're not able to shift with that. And so if you look at those traits of good leaders, those are the only two that I think in the end really matter. So my learning lesson is I have to share more of my life, and I don't know how I feel about that, but yeah.
Those are really great lessons. I really appreciate you taking time to talk to me today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eric.
All right. Well, if you want to hear more from great leaders like Michaele, please subscribe. Also, if you're interested in connecting with Michaele, I'll provide her LinkedIn URL down below. And thank you for watching.